Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Katie Saint, and this parent training video is about self-care. I cannot stress enough how important this is, and I know as parents it's often the first thing to go. So we're going to dive into this and we're going to talk about this topic and explore how we can implement more self-care into our lives. So I will share my screen. Here we go. All right, so the stats on mental health and being a parent are not very good. So depression in mothers of young children is estimated at about 40%. That's super high. So maternal depression is considered a risk factor for social, emotional, cognitive, and cognitive development. So like your mental health is really important for the development of your child. But the good news is that success rates for treatment is at about 90%. So seeking help for depression works. So when we look at these stats and we consider parents of special needs, the mental health struggles with anxiety and depression are actually quite a bit higher. The job that you have is hard. It's fulfilling and rewarding in so many ways, but it's also really hard. And I think we need to validate that and take an honest look at that so that we can learn how to work around it and how to support each other. So self-care is something that we all need to do. It is a biological human need. And when we don't, the stress of everyday life, the stress of parenting, the stress of living releases cortisol into our body. When cortisol is released into our body, it starts to eat away at us. So our hair falls out, our skin is not as healthy, our organs begin to not function as much. We get headaches, backaches, stomach aches. All of that, like literally every part of our body starts to suffer. Not to mention, when we're not okay, the way we treat other people, the way we regulate our emotions, it is so much harder to have a calm and loving response when we're not okay. So self-care is super, super critical. We all need it. So self-care is really good for our kids because, like I said, when we're not okay, it's hard to treat people well. It's hard to be patient. It's hard to be understanding. And so like that previous research mentioned, when we're not okay, it hurts the development of our children. And I don't share that with you to make you feel bad or guilty. I'm hoping that helps see that it's not selfish when you take care of yourself. I've heard so many parents talk about that where like they feel guilty giving themselves alone time, or they feel guilty going out with friends once in a while. And it's truly not something for you to feel guilty about. This is how you become a better parent. This is how you better care for your child, and you're modeling healthy coping mechanisms. You're teaching your child that socializing is an important part of life and that self-care is critical for all humans. So there's some barriers to self-care. I have talked to many parents who have shared with me they don't have any babysitters. There's literally no one who they know that will watch their kids. That's a pretty big barrier. There is a time. Sometimes it's just you're so busy. There's so much that you have to do that it's really hard. Or the needs of your children or other people in your family is so intense that there's some serious consequences if you go away for a while. So these are pretty huge barriers. And that's where I would encourage all of you to be in contact with the county. There's different services to help with this. Respite is an example of one of them. Some people feel guilty taking advantage of respite. Do not feel guilty about that. That is good for your mental health. This is something that can help you be able to do the self-care that you need. And don't feel guilty reaching out to friends and family for help and support. I know a lot of people are afraid of being a burden to others and they don't want to ask too much. But we can't live this life alone. We're made to be in community, and we are more effective when we are. So don't be afraid to lean on your loved ones a little bit. So there's different areas of self-care that we need to look at and think about. We have physical areas of self-care. I remember when my kids were born and they were just like infants, just fresh into the world. They weren't sleeping at night, and between feeding them and taking care of them and trying to sleep, I just felt like, I wish I wasn't human. Like, I don't have time to shower. I don't have time to eat. Like, I'm just overwhelmed. So we have these physical needs, and if we don't meet them, we struggle. We're not okay. If there's a story I heard of a parent whose kid really, really struggles to sleep, and so they're driving around for several hours at night to help their child sleep. That means they're not sleeping. I can only imagine, like, this parent is so dedicated and so loving to be able to do that. But not getting that sleep is gonna really suck. It's gonna be really hard. And I know there's a lot of parents out there who aren't getting sleep. So this is where, like, please talk to your treatment team. We want to help with that. We have strategies that can help your child sleep through the night. So if this is something you're struggling with, reach out to us and let us know. So we need to find ways to meet our physical needs. That is one really important area of self-care. Intellectual needs. If we don't have an intellectual outlet, it leads to depression. If we're not challenged in a way with our brains, then we struggle. So we need a creative outlet or something that we can put our brain to work. Emotional. This is super, super important. This is where we need to talk about what's bothering us. We need to journal about it. We need to process it. Otherwise, we're just going to be reactionary, and we're going to be snapping at people and exploding and all that kind of stuff if we don't deal with our emotions. Some of us have trauma in our past, so there's a lot of really difficult emotions to work through. And if we don't, we're really going to struggle. So this is important work, and it's important to model for our children as well. They watch us and they replicate how we do things. So spiritual and social. So for spiritual, we need to feel like we have a purpose. We need to feel like there's a point to living. There's a point to life. And so when we start to struggle in this area, depression gets really powerful. So some ways that people find meaning and find purpose is helping others, or everybody's purpose can look a little bit different. And so if you're feeling like you don't know what your purpose is, like, that's something worth exploring. So whether you're talking to a counselor about it or loved ones, this is something that gives people deep meaning and gives people the drive to keep moving forward and the drive to do hard things. So social is really, really critical. I've heard some parents talk about having a child with special needs can be isolating because it's hard for them to hang out with friends, or some people don't understand, or people are judgmental, or different things like that. And so that's where I would strongly encourage you to reach out to the Autism Society. There's support groups, there's different people, other parents who are in your situation that want connection as well. And so this is where taking advantage of those resources can really be helpful to you and other people. Lastly is occupational. So there's a biological human need to be productive. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a job that you're getting paid for. But the research really shows that if we're not productive, our mental health struggles. So productivity can be cleaning your house and doing different things like that as well. But just sitting around all day, sometimes we say we're having a mental health day and like we spend the entire day doing nothing. It's kind of misleading to call that a mental health day because it's actually not good for our mental health, and we don't get needed chemicals when we sit around that much. And cortisol and different things like that build up in our system that make us suffer. So that productivity is a really important piece of our mental health. And another thing that parents face, especially since COVID happened, is some parents are dealing with a ton of stress with working from home and also parenting. So that's been a huge barrier for some parents as well. So that's another thing your therapy team can help with, though. Let us know if that's a struggle you're having, and we can work with your child to help them understand like when you can be interrupted, when you can't, and just different strategies for how they can be independent when you need to do something productive, or talk with your therapy team about the struggles you're facing, and we can make a plan together. So self-care tools. So one tool is mindfulness. And what I mean by that is like when we're aware of our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions and our needs, it allows us to do something about it. So when you're struggling and you've got internal stuff going on, but you're not consciously thinking about it, you just react. You're reactionary, and so you're not making intentional choices that make your life better. A lot of times you make choices that hurt you. And so when we just practice mindfulness on a daily basis, how am I feeling? What are my needs? What matters in this moment? Then we don't struggle as much. We make better choices. But this is a muscle that we need to practice. If we don't use it, we lose it. And so like I can testify to that. Like sometimes I'm good at this. Sometimes I'm really intentional about being mindful. And other times I'll go long periods of time without doing it at all. And then I'll notice eventually that like, hey, I'm struggling. I'm starting to make choices I don't approve of, and I'm drifting. So then I need to get back on track. So this is something we need to do on a regular basis. So journaling is really healthy, really good for you to process your emotions. Exercise, I cannot encourage exercise enough. The research on exercise is so powerful for how it helps our emotional and physical health. There's so many things that exercise can prevent. There's even studies about how exercise has been effective as taking medication for depression. So some people, once they got into a regular routine of exercising, they no longer met the qualifications for the depression diagnosis. So it's equally effective for anxiety. So really, exercise is something that we all need to figure out how to incorporate into our lives, because it's going to prevent so much suffering. So professional help, take advantage of counseling. I'm a counselor and I've done counseling. I think literally every person on this earth would benefit from counseling. We all have hard stuff that we've gone through, and there's emotions and situations that we need to process that are just difficult. And what's cool about talking to a counselor rather than a friend is like they're trained to not be biased. They're trained to give you advice that isn't going to screw you over or hurt you. And it's all about you then too. So you don't have to feel selfish about like, oh, I'm sorry I talked about myself too much. Like they are paid to listen to you. So take advantage of it. We all could benefit from this. Social connection is next. This is so important. There's a lot of research about how if you're isolated, you get sick longer, and like our bodies physically break down if we're not socially connected. We are biologically wired to be in community with each other, and when we're not, we struggle. So we need to be intentional about this, and we need to be creative about how we can foster those relationships, but then also mindful about like, what am I doing to push people away? Because sometimes our defense mechanisms, our insecurities, Like, we assume rejection where there isn't, and we're just doing things that are pushing people away when we wouldn't necessarily have to. So that takes some self-reflection and some work on ourselves that we need to do so that we're not pushing people away. Lastly is eating healthy. Our food drastically impacts our mental health. So anxiety and alcohol, for example, or caffeine and alcohol, for example, has a really big impact on anxiety and depression. And so for a while, I was drinking like 2 pots of coffee a day. And so it got me in this cycle where my anxiety was really high and then my energy levels were low. So what happens when you put that much stimulants into your body is your body stops producing stimulants. So when the caffeine wore off, like I would quit drinking coffee by like 2 o'clock or so. I had a crash. Like, I always had low energy in the afternoon. And I was like, what the heck? Like, I'm a healthy person. Why do I have no energy? It's because my body quit producing stimulants because I was ingesting so much caffeine. So when we put chemicals into our body like that, it messes with our system and it messes with our body's ability to like produce healthy chemicals. The same is true of drinking alcohol. So if you're a glass of wine a day sort of alcohol drinker, what can happen is our body doesn't go into deep sleep when we have alcohol in our system. So say you have your last glass of wine at, 9 o'clock. It takes about 6 hours to fully get out of your system. So typically when it wears off, then you wake up. And so whether it's just like a groggy wake up that you're not fully aware of, or like a full wake up where like, oh man, now I need to go to the bathroom, whatever. So you wake up, and then after that, you tend to go into like, you can fall asleep again, but it's still not that quality sleep. So if we're having this daily habit of that, it's interrupting our sleep and making us not function as well. And there also is anxiety and depression cycles associated with alcohol. So alcohol is a depressant. So it does like cause depression. But when it wears off, it also causes a spike in anxiety. So a lot of times what we see with people who drink alcohol on a regular basis is they actually go through a cycle of anxiety and depression. And so, but then they often are using the alcohol to cope with those feelings. And so they're just stuck in this cycle about it. So being mindful of what we ingest can really help regulate our emotions. Same thing with like sugar. Sugar spikes our blood sugar levels. And when our blood sugar levels are out of whack, same thing with processed carbs like white bread, things like that. It's harder for us to be emotionally regulated. And it's harder for us to control our actions and be mindful and all of that kind of stuff. So what we eat, what we ingest really matters, and it makes it so much easier, or it makes it so much harder for us to make the choices that we want to make. So what self-care is not is eating unhealthy, drinking alcohol, damaging behaviors, sitting around all day and doing nothing. Is it okay to do these things once in a while? Absolutely. But do not do them in the name of self-care. So these behaviors, if done chronically, are going to hurt us. And so we need to be mindful of that. Self-care is things that are going to build us up, are going to make us cope with life better. And so if these are our outlets to take care of ourselves and not the other healthy ones, we're going to suffer more, not less. So there are support groups and things like that in the area. Autism Society, I believe, puts some on. Look into that. Definitely take advantage of counseling. Like I said, I really think we all would benefit from it. So don't be ashamed. Don't feel like, oh, I need to be really struggling before I go to counseling. We all could benefit from counseling. So to conclude, think about some action steps. What can you do to pursue self-care? What can you add into your life? if you're feeling stuck right now, like, I honestly don't know how I can add anything. Like, I just don't know. Talk to your senior therapist about it. Reach out to them and say, like, hey, will you help me brainstorm about self-care? Like, this is something I struggle with, and I can't picture how to implement it in my life. And they can brainstorm with you and make a plan. And maybe there's some treatment stuff we can do as well that will help with making it easier to practice self-care. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening. Please know self-care is not selfish.